David Kahn, a retired Navy SEAL, walked into the courthouse that morning with steady steps. The building was old but well kept, with high ceilings and polished floors that reflected the sunlight streaming through the windows. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from years of discipline and experience. Today he was not on a mission in some faraway place. Today he faced a personal challenge, a property dispute that had dragged on for months. David had served his country for over 20 years. He had faced challenges that most people could never imagine. He had survived intense training, dangerous missions, and high-pressure situations where every decision could mean life or death. Yet nothing had prepared him for the feeling he sensed as he entered the courtroom. The tension, the whispered comments, and the curious stares from strangers. He took a seat near the front, waiting for the session to begin. People filled the benches behind him, some chatting quietly, others watching him with interest. There was an air of anticipation, as if everyone sensed that something unusual might happen in the room that day. Soon, the judge entered, wearing a dark robe and carrying a stack of papers. His steps echoed in the courtroom. He was a man with a reputation for being strict and unyielding. David had expected a fair hearing, but he also knew that the judge's stern reputation could make things uncomfortable. The session began. David presented his documents clearly, explaining the situation with precision. He spoke calmly without anger or haste, detailing the facts and explaining why he believed the property issue should be resolved in his favor. His voice was steady, firm, and respectful. He expected the judge to listen and make a fair decision based on the evidence. But the judge did not respond as David expected. Instead of listening, the judge interrupted, his tone sharp and dismissive. "Do you really think that your past service gives you any special advantage here?" he asked loudly, almost mocking. The words hit David like an unexpected blow, but he did not react immediately. He remained calm, remembering the countless times he had trained himself to stay composed in the face of pressure. The courtroom fell silent. Spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some whispered among themselves, unsure of what to make of the judge's harsh words. David felt a mix of surprise and disappointment. He had faced challenges that demanded courage and quick thinking, but this was different. This was a personal attack in front of strangers, meant to humiliate him. For a moment he considered reacting angrily. He could have raised his voice, defended himself sharply, or demanded respect. But years of experience had taught him that reacting with anger rarely solved anything. It only escalated problems. He took a deep breath, letting the tension settle around him, and focused on what he could control, his own actions and words. The judge continued, questioning David's credibility and making comments that seemed unnecessary. "Are you sure you understand how the law works?" the judge asked, leaning forward slightly. Some people in the courtroom laughed quietly as if the judge's words were a form of entertainment. David ignored the laughter. He knew that maintaining dignity in difficult moments could make a stronger statement than responding with anger. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge seemed to grow impatient and dismissed David's initial arguments. The room held its breath, sensing that something important was about to happen. David slowly stood, his posture straight, his eyes calm but determined. He asked for permission to speak, his voice soft but firm. Everyone turned to look at him. The spectators sensed that this retired Navy SEAL, who had been publicly humiliated, was about to respond in a way that would be unexpected. There was a quiet tension in the air, a moment of anticipation. David took another deep breath. He knew that how he responded here would matter, not just for the case but for how people perceived courage, respect, and integrity. He began to speak, carefully choosing his words. He did not shout, he did not argue angrily. Instead, he spoke with the quiet authority that came from years of experience, training, and discipline. The judge, momentarily taken aback by the calm dignity in David's tone, leaned back in his chair, clearly unsure of how to respond. The room, which had been tense and uncertain, began to pay attention. Every word David spoke carried weight. People listened not just to what he said, but to how he said it, calmly, confidently, and with an unmistakable sense of purpose. David knew that this was only the beginning. The judge had tried to humiliate him publicly, but David's response, measured and dignified, was about to turn the situation in a completely unexpected direction. The courtroom remained quiet, the tension almost tangible. David Kahn had stood up, his posture straight, his hands resting calmly on the edge of the table. Everyone could sense that something different was about to happen. The judge, however, seemed unfazed at first, his eyes narrowing as he prepared to speak again. "You think you can speak to me like that?" the judge said sharply. His voice echoed off the walls, carrying authority and judgment. "You are just a retired soldier. Your service does not make you above the law." David listened without interrupting. He had faced much worse in faraway lands, in situations where lives were at stake. This was a test of patience and composure, a different kind of battlefield. He knew that responding with anger would only give the judge the satisfaction of thinking he had won. Instead, he waited, choosing his words carefully. He began speaking in a calm, clear voice, letting every word land with weight. "Your Honor, I respect the law and the position you hold. I am here because I believe in fairness and justice. My past service is not a shield. It is a reminder of the values I try to live by: honor, discipline, and respect for others." The courtroom fell even quieter. The spectators, who had been watching the exchange with curiosity, now leaned forward. There was a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle but noticeable change. People were no longer focused on the judge's harsh words. They were listening to David's calm explanation. The judge frowned, clearly taken aback. He was used to people either arguing aggressively or staying silent, but David's approach was different. It was quiet, strong, and unyielding in a way that could not be easily dismissed. "Do you expect sympathy?" the judge asked, his tone sharp but slightly uncertain. "You are trying to manipulate this court with your stories and your past." David's expression did not change. He looked the judge in the eye, his voice steady. "I do not seek sympathy, Your Honor. I seek understanding. I seek fairness. Everyone here has a story, a history that shapes who they are. I ask only that my case be judged on facts, not assumptions or disrespect." A few spectators nodded quietly. The words resonated with them. They could sense the courage it took to respond so calmly in front of authority. David's presence was commanding, not because of loud words or dramatic gestures, but because of his control, his poise, and his integrity. The judge leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He was momentarily silent, clearly unsure how to respond. David used the pause to continue, reinforcing his message without raising his voice. "In my life, I have faced challenges that tested every part of me, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I have learned that losing control never solves a problem. Staying calm and focused allows us to face challenges with clarity and strength. That is what I am doing here today." The room seemed to hold its breath. David's words were not just a defense. They were a lesson in courage and dignity. People who had come expecting drama or conflict were now witnessing something far more powerful. A man standing up for himself with respect and intelligence, even when faced with public humiliation. Some spectators discreetly began recording the moment on their phones. They sensed that this was not an ordinary courtroom exchange. This was something worth remembering, something that could inspire others. The judge finally spoke again, but his voice lacked the earlier confidence. "Very well," he said slowly. "You may continue with your case. But remember, respect is earned through actions, not words." David nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement. He had made his point. He had shown that humiliation could be met with dignity and calm, and that true strength was measured not by anger, but by patience and self-control. As he returned to his seat, a quiet energy spread through the courtroom. People whispered among themselves, clearly impressed by his composure. Some even exchanged smiles, recognizing the courage it took to respond with respect when provoked. David knew this was only the beginning. The confrontation had started as an attempt to belittle him, but his calm, measured response had shifted the power. In that courtroom, he had already begun to turn public humiliation into quiet influence, a lesson that would ripple far beyond those walls. David Kahn returned to his seat, but his mind remained fully alert. The courtroom was quiet now, filled with a sense of curiosity. The spectators who had been skeptical or unsure were now watching him closely. Even the judge, who had tried to humiliate him, seemed slightly unsettled. David knew that the way he handled himself in these next moments would be remembered far longer than the judge's words. He took a deep breath, centering himself. In his years as a Navy SEAL, he had learned that patience was as powerful as action. A moment of calm could change the outcome of a situation more than force or anger ever could. He thought of his team, his missions, and the countless times he had had to make careful decisions under pressure. This was different, but it still required the same principle: control and clarity. When the judge called him to speak again, David stood. His movement was slow and deliberate, commanding attention without demanding it. He looked around the courtroom, meeting the eyes of the spectators and then returning his gaze to the judge. His calm presence itself was unusual, and it made the room pay attention. "Your Honor," David began, his voice steady, "I do not come here seeking conflict. I do not seek to argue over words or appearances. I come here for fairness, to present facts, and to show respect to this court. I have spent my life serving my country, facing challenges that required courage, discipline, and focus. But those years taught me one simple truth: respect is earned through action, not demanded through words." The judge's eyes narrowed, but David continued without hesitation. "I understand the position you hold and I respect it. But I also believe that every individual deserves to be heard and treated with dignity. When someone tries to humiliate or belittle another, it does not make them stronger. It simply reveals the weakness of their character. I am here to demonstrate that strength can be quiet, patient, and respectful." The courtroom remained still, everyone listening carefully. The spectators who had whispered or laughed earlier were now fully engaged. They could see the difference between anger and composure, between reaction and response. David's words carried a quiet power that was impossible to ignore. He continued, sharing a brief story from his military service, not to boast, but to illustrate a lesson. "During my time in service, there were moments when everything seemed impossible, when danger was near and decisions had to be made instantly. In those moments, acting with control and clarity made all the difference. Losing control, reacting with anger or panic could have cost lives. That lesson has stayed with me. Today, it guides how I respond to challenges, even in this courtroom." Some spectators were quietly nodding. Others were holding their phones, subtly recording the moment. They sensed that what they were witnessing was unusual, inspiring even. David had taken a situation meant to embarrass him and turned it into a lesson on integrity and courage. The judge, still sitting in his elevated chair, found himself at a loss for words. David's calm, steady tone left no room for further ridicule. The authority that the judge had tried to assert with sharp words was now overshadowed by David's quiet dignity. Every eye in the room could see that the balance of power had shifted, not through confrontation but through composure. David concluded, his voice gentle yet firm. "I stand here not to fight, not to humiliate, and not to seek revenge. I stand here to show that dignity, respect, and calm resolve are far stronger than anger or insult. How we respond to challenges defines who we are more than the challenges themselves." He sat down slowly, his expression composed. A wave of quiet admiration spread through the room. People whispered to each other, clearly impressed by the way he handled himself. Even some who had initially doubted him were now silently acknowledging his strength. David knew that this moment, though brief, would have a lasting impact. His calm response had already begun to turn public humiliation into respect. He had shown everyone present, and those who might later hear about it, that courage did not always roar. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and undeniable. As David Kahn returned to his seat, the courtroom was filled with a different energy. The whispers of the spectators were no longer filled with skepticism or amusement. Instead, there was a quiet respect, a sense that something remarkable had just happened. David's calm and composed words had shifted the atmosphere. People had seen not just a man defending himself, but a man demonstrating courage, discipline, and dignity under pressure. Unnoticed by many in the room, one young spectator had discreetly raised a phone and began recording David's speech. The angle captured his calm posture, his steady voice, and the way he addressed the judge with respect while maintaining authority. The recording was brief but powerful, and the young man knew instantly that it was worth sharing. After the session ended, the spectator uploaded the video online. Within a few hours, the recording began circulating on social media. People were drawn to the way David handled public humiliation without raising his voice or losing his composure. Comments flooded in from across the country, praising his restraint, courage, and wisdom. "This is how real strength looks," one viewer wrote. Another added, "We should all learn to face disrespect with calm and dignity like him." The video spread rapidly, reaching millions of viewers in just a short time. News outlets soon picked up the story, highlighting the unique situation in the small courtroom that had captured the attention of so many. Meanwhile, David remained unaware of the growing attention. After leaving the courthouse, he walked to his car with the same quiet confidence he had always carried. He did not seek recognition or approval. For him, the most important thing had been to act with integrity, not to gain fame. His life had always been guided by the principle that actions speak louder than words. Yet as the video continued to circulate, it became clear that the story resonated with many people. Viewers admired not just David's military background, but how he applied the lessons he had learned in service to everyday challenges. His response showed that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and firm. Social media users began discussing the broader lesson behind the video. Teachers shared it in classrooms as an example of emotional intelligence. Leaders used it as a model for handling difficult situations at work. Young people admired the way David did not let anger control him. In a world often filled with loud arguments and heated debates, David's calm, respectful approach stood out as remarkable. Even commentators who were usually skeptical of social media fame acknowledged the impact of his words. They noted that while the judge had tried to embarrass him publicly, David had turned the situation into a teaching moment. It was proof that dignity and patience often leave a stronger impression than confrontation or anger. As the video went viral, David began receiving messages from people he did not know. Many wrote to thank him for inspiring them. Veterans, parents, students, and professionals all shared their admiration. They expressed how his example encouraged them to face challenges calmly and maintain respect even under pressure. Back at home, David reflected on the events of the day. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not from the attention but from knowing that his actions had created a positive impact. He realized that the moment in the courtroom had become more than just a personal experience. It had become a story that could inspire others, a story showing that courage and dignity could prevail in even the most uncomfortable situations. For David, the lesson was clear. Sometimes, the most powerful way to respond to humiliation or disrespect is with calm, controlled action. By choosing integrity over anger, he had not only defended himself but had also offered a model for others to follow. The viral video was a reminder that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it speaks quietly and leaves a lasting impression on everyone who witnesses it. Within a few days of the courtroom incident, David Kahn's calm and powerful response began to attract nationwide attention. The video of him speaking to the judge circulated widely on social media platforms, shared by people from all walks of life. Viewers admired the way he remained composed in the face of public humiliation. They saw a man who had faced challenges far greater than any courtroom dispute, yet chose patience, dignity, and respect over anger. News channels started featuring the story in short segments. Anchors highlighted David's background as a retired Navy SEAL and emphasized the unusual nature of the courtroom exchange. Interviews with legal experts discussed the importance of staying composed during confrontations, using David's response as an example. The story quickly became more than a viral video. It became a topic of conversation nationwide. People online expressed admiration in messages and comments. "This is how true courage looks," one user wrote. "Not with shouting or anger, but with calm, strong words," added another. Veterans in particular related to David's approach. They understood the discipline required to remain in control when faced with provocation. Many shared their own stories of maintaining patience under pressure, praising David as a model of integrity. Schools and community groups began sharing the video with students and young adults. Teachers used it as a lesson in emotional intelligence, showing how to handle difficult situations with respect and calm. Parents shared it with their children as an example of standing up for oneself without disrespecting others. David's story began inspiring people not just to defend themselves, but to act thoughtfully and responsibly in challenging moments. David himself remained humble throughout the growing attention. He did not seek interviews or public recognition. When asked about the incident by friends or family, he said simply, I acted the way I felt was right. That is all. I never intended for it to become a story. I just wanted to handle the situation with respect. His modesty only increased the admiration people felt for him. As more media outlets covered the story, they explored the contrast between David's calm composure and the judge's harsh words. Commentators pointed out that while the judge tried to assert authority through ridicule, David's quiet strength commanded respect naturally. People began to understand that humility and self-control often leave a stronger impression than anger or confrontation. Social media continued to amplify the message. Hashtags related to David's story trended, and people created posts highlighting lessons from his response. Quotes from his courtroom speech were shared widely, reminding others that dignity, patience, and integrity are powerful tools in everyday life. Even people unfamiliar with the details of the case were moved by the example he had set. Veteran organizations and community leaders reached out to David, inviting him to speak at events and share his experiences. While he accepted only a few invitations, he recognized that his story had become more than personal vindication. It had become a lesson for people everywhere, a reminder that courage does not always roar. It often speaks quietly but leaves a lasting impression. At home, David reflected on the rapid attention the story had received. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not because of fame but because people were learning from his actions. He had turned an uncomfortable situation into an opportunity to demonstrate values he had long lived by: respect, patience, and courage. He realized that true influence comes not from power or position, but from the example one sets through actions. Even the spectators who had been in the courtroom noticed the growing attention online. Many reached out to express their admiration for the way David handled the situation. They said it inspired them to approach conflicts in their own lives differently, calmly, thoughtfully, and with integrity. By the end of the week, David's story had traveled far beyond the small courtroom where it began. What started as an attempt at humiliation had become an inspiring lesson for thousands, then millions of people. His calm response had not only defended his dignity, but had shown the world the true meaning of courage. The courtroom incident had long passed, but the ripple effect of David Kahn's calm and dignified response continued to grow. The viral video had captured millions of views online, and news outlets frequently replayed the moment where David faced public humiliation with courage and poise. While most of the attention celebrated David's actions, the judge who had tried to embarrass him found himself facing criticism he had not anticipated. In the days following the viral spread of the video, the judge's office received calls, emails, and messages questioning his conduct during the hearing. People expressed surprise that a court official would attempt to publicly humiliate someone in front of spectators. The attention was uncomfortable, and the judge felt the pressure of public scrutiny for the first time in his career. Eventually, the judge issued a statement. His words were formal and brief. "I acknowledge the events that occurred in the courtroom on that day. While I stand by my role and responsibilities as a judge, I recognize that the situation has drawn public attention. I trust the legal process will continue fairly." The statement avoided apology and did little to address the public's concerns. Meanwhile, the public continued to celebrate David. Social media users dissected his calm words, praising how he had handled authority and humiliation with integrity. "This is a lesson for all of us," one user wrote. "Not every fight needs anger. Some battles are won by patience and dignity." People shared the video repeatedly, discussing the importance of emotional intelligence and self-control. David, however, remained humble. He did not respond to media interviews immediately, preferring to maintain his quiet, thoughtful approach. For him, the recognition was not important. The lesson he had demonstrated, handling conflict with respect, even under pressure, was far more valuable than fame or attention. The contrast between David's measured response and the judge's attempts at control became a major talking point. Experts on leadership and ethics highlighted how the situation demonstrated that true authority is earned through respect, not fear or intimidation. David's calmness had made a stronger impression than any harsh words the judge could have delivered. Community leaders and educators began using the story as an example of integrity in action. They pointed out that courage is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes the quiet choices one makes in the face of disrespect or humiliation define character far more effectively than any confrontation. David's actions showed that strength lies in composure, thoughtfulness, and respect. Even among legal professionals, there was acknowledgement that David's conduct had set an example. Many spoke about the power of remaining calm under scrutiny, and how emotional intelligence can influence not only a case but also public perception. The story became a lesson in how patience and discipline can create impact far beyond the immediate situation. David continued his daily life quietly, attending community events, helping veterans, and mentoring young people. The attention from the viral video brought opportunities for him to share lessons of courage and integrity, but he accepted only those that aligned with his values. He spoke about discipline, respect, and calm leadership, emphasizing that these qualities mattered more than any single moment of recognition. While the judge's statement had attempted to maintain authority, the public's focus had shifted entirely. David's calm response, recorded in that small courtroom, had become a symbol of true strength and dignity. The contrast was clear. One man sought to humiliate, the other chose patience, respect, and integrity. And in the eyes of the world, the choice was obvious. For David, the lesson was simple. Responding with dignity in moments of public challenge has a power far beyond immediate circumstances. The recognition, viral attention, and admiration he received were not goals but consequences of acting with principle. The world had seen that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it speaks quietly, firmly, and leaves a lasting impression that outshines all attempts at humiliation. Weeks passed since the courtroom incident, but David Kahn's calm response continued to inspire people far beyond the small courtroom where it had occurred. The video of his measured words had reached millions online, and its message resonated deeply. Teachers, students, veterans, and ordinary citizens alike shared the story, emphasizing how courage, patience, and integrity could leave a powerful impact. David had never sought attention. He lived a quiet life, focused on his family, community, and the principles he had followed as a Navy SEAL. Yet the recognition he received was not about fame. It was about influence. People were learning from his example, understanding that responding with dignity, even under public humiliation, was a mark of true strength. Schools began including David's story and lessons about emotional intelligence, leadership, and courage. Teachers explained to students how he had faced a situation where anyone could have reacted with anger, yet he chose to remain calm, respectful, and focused. Sometimes the strongest action is the quietest, a teacher told her class showing David's video. Students were fascinated. They saw that courage did not always involve fighting or shouting. It could involve control, patience, and dignity. Community organizations and veteran groups also reached out to David. They invited him to speak at events about leadership, respect, and overcoming challenges with integrity. Though he accepted only a few invitations, David used these opportunities to emphasize values that had guided his life: discipline, respect, patience, and calm decision-making. He explained that these qualities were more powerful than anger or confrontation, and they could help people in their daily lives, not just in extraordinary situations. Young adults and professionals found particular inspiration in David's story. Many shared how it encouraged them to approach conflicts at work or in social settings with more thought and composure. "I realize that reacting angrily does not solve problems," one viewer wrote online. "Watching David handle humiliation calmly taught me that patience and respect can change outcomes and earn genuine influence." Even veterans and service members reached out to David personally, expressing admiration for how he applied lessons from his military service to everyday life. They appreciated his example because it reflected the core principles they had lived by: discipline, integrity, and calm leadership in difficult circumstances. David's story reminded them that courage is not only about physical strength but also about character and moral steadiness. David, meanwhile, remained humble and grounded. He did not let the widespread attention change who he was or how he acted. For him, the viral video and the public praise were simply reminders that actions, guided by principle, can inspire others far more than words alone. He often reflected on how a single moment, when handled thoughtfully, could have a lasting impact on countless people. Friends and family noticed the growing influence of David's story. They saw how he had become a quiet mentor for many, even without seeking the role. People reached out for advice, inspiration, and guidance. He encouraged them to face challenges with calmness, to act with integrity, and to remember that respect is earned through thoughtful action, not through anger or power. David's influence spread in subtle but meaningful ways. Social media posts, classroom discussions, and community events continued to share his example. Even months after the incident, people were still inspired to think before reacting, to maintain dignity in difficult situations, and to lead by example. His calm response in the courtroom had become a blueprint for handling life's challenges with courage, patience, and respect. Through it all, David remained himself, quiet, disciplined, and humble. He understood that the true reward of his actions was not attention or recognition, but the positive change he could encourage in others. His story showed that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and unshakable, and sometimes that quiet strength inspires more people than any loud or dramatic gesture ever could. Months had passed since the courtroom incident that had unexpectedly made David Kahn a figure of public admiration. The video of his calm, dignified response to the judge's humiliation continued to circulate online, inspiring countless people. David, however, remained the same quiet, disciplined man he had always been. He did not seek fame or recognition. His focus was on living his life with integrity, helping others, and quietly teaching the values he believed in. The attention had created opportunities for him to speak at schools, veteran organizations, and community events. Each time he spoke, David emphasized the importance of patience, respect, and self-control. He told his audience that true courage was not about raising one's voice or seeking revenge. It was about maintaining dignity, thinking clearly, and acting with integrity even when others tried to belittle you. David's message resonated with people of all ages. Students were inspired to face challenges calmly and to choose respect over anger. Professionals in workplaces began applying the lessons he shared to handle conflict thoughtfully and productively. Veterans found a sense of connection in his story, recognizing that the principles he demonstrated were ones they had lived by during their service. Even the online community continued to celebrate David's example. Social media posts highlighting his calm courage were shared widely, and quotes from his courtroom speech became a source of daily motivation for many. People commented on how his actions showed that respect and dignity could be far more powerful than anger or harsh words. David, though aware of his influence, never let it change him. He continued his daily life with simplicity and humility. He spent time with his family, mentored young people in his community, and assisted veteran organizations quietly. While the attention and praise were significant, what mattered most to him was that his story encouraged positive behavior in others. The courtroom incident had taught him something he now shared with the world. The impact of quiet strength and thoughtful action could reach far beyond a single moment. The judge, who had tried to humiliate David months ago, remained a public figure, but his attempt to assert authority through ridicule was now widely discussed as a lesson in humility. The contrast between David's composure and the judge's harsh words was frequently analyzed in social media posts, articles, and community discussions. David's calm response had become a standard for handling conflict with grace, and it continued to influence people long after the original incident. David's story became more than just a viral video. It became a symbol of how integrity and courage could prevail in everyday life. People realized that strength is not always about loud displays or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it is found in quiet, steady actions, in calm responses, and in the ability to maintain dignity under pressure. David's example demonstrated that anyone could inspire others by choosing patience, respect, and moral courage over rash reactions. For David, the lasting reward was the knowledge that his actions had made a difference. He had taken a moment that could have been humiliating and turned it into a teaching moment for the world. His calmness had not only defended his dignity, but had also encouraged countless others to think before they reacted, to value respect, and to act with integrity in challenging situations. Even years later, people continued to refer to David Kahn's story as an example of courage and composure. His courtroom response became a lesson in leadership, a model for conflict resolution, and a reminder that true strength often comes in quiet, thoughtful ways. David's legacy was not built on fame or recognition, but on the positive impact he had on the lives of others. In the end, David understood that the greatest victories are not always loud or celebrated. They are found in the quiet choices we make, the integrity we maintain, and the courage to act rightly even when faced with disrespect. His story proved that true courage is lasting, influential and powerful not because it shouts, but because it inspires. David Kahn had turned a moment of public humiliation into a legacy of respect, courage, and dignity. And in doing so, he showed the world that courage is not measured by confrontation, but by the strength to rise above it.